Sometimes the cruelest insult is the one people think you're too ordinary to understand. The dinner rush had just begun when Nathan Reynolds walked into Bennett's Steakhouse. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Even the crystal glasses seemed to catch a little more light as the billionaire crossed the dining room. At 38, Nathan had built a technology empire worth billions of dollars. Business magazines called him brilliant. Financial networks called him visionary. Most people simply called him intimidating. He wore a charcoal suit that looked tailored down to the smallest stitch and a Swiss watch worth more than many Americans earned in a year. The hostess greeted him with her best smile. Nathan barely noticed. His attention was already on the group of European investors waiting near the back of the restaurant. Tonight's dinner could determine the future of a major international partnership. Millions of dollars were attached to every conversation at that table. Maybe more. Across the room, Charlotte Bennett adjusted the cuff of her black waitress uniform and balanced a tray against her hip. She looked like any other server working a busy Friday night. Simple ponytail. No jewelry except a small silver necklace tucked beneath her collar. Calm blue eyes. Quiet movements. The kind of person most customers forgot seconds after placing an order, which was exactly how Charlotte preferred it. "Table 12 is yours," another waitress whispered. Charlotte glanced toward the dining room and immediately recognized Nathan Reynolds. Most people in Manhattan knew who he was. She picked up a leather menu and walked toward the table. The investors were already seated when she arrived. Nathan stood at the head of the group, shaking hands and exchanging greetings. He didn't look at her when she approached. "Good evening," Charlotte said warmly. "Welcome to Bennett's. My name is Charlotte, and I'll be taking care of your table tonight." Nathan finally glanced her way. Just a quick look. Barely a second. Then his attention returned to his guests. "Water for everyone," he said. "Sparkling." Charlotte nodded. "Of course." She began filling glasses with practiced precision. The investors continued chatting. Most spoke English. One spoke with a strong Parisian accent. Another switched comfortably between English and French. Charlotte listened quietly while arranging silverware. Then Nathan leaned back in his chair and spoke in fluent French. "At least this place seems respectable," he said casually, "though I'm not sure about the service." A few investors chuckled. Charlotte continued pouring water. Her expression never changed. Nathan glanced toward her before continuing in French. "Most waitresses hear a foreign language and assume we're discussing business. It never occurs to them we might be discussing them." More laughter. One investor smirked. Another looked uncomfortable. Charlotte set down the final glass and folded her hands politely. Nathan continued. "Still, she looks attentive enough. That's something." The words sounded pleasant to anyone who didn't understand French, but the tone underneath them carried something else. Condescension. Amusement. The kind of superiority that comes from believing someone beneath you cannot hear the joke. Charlotte simply smiled. "Are you ready to hear tonight's specials?" she asked. Nathan looked momentarily surprised. Not because of her question, because of her composure. Most people reacted to his presence. They became nervous, eager, sometimes intimidated. Charlotte seemed unaffected. "Go ahead," he said. She explained the specials with quiet confidence. Every detail was precise. Every pronunciation perfect. Even the French wine names flowed naturally from her lips. One of the Parisian investors tilted his head slightly. Nathan didn't notice. Charlotte finished and handed menus around the table. "Take your time," she said. "I'll return in a few minutes." As she turned away, Nathan spoke in French again, this time softer. "See? Not a clue." The investors laughed politely. Charlotte kept walking. Her pace never changed. Her shoulders never stiffened. Her smile never disappeared. Near the kitchen entrance, an older chef looked up from the service window. He had heard enough to understand exactly what was happening. Their eyes met for a brief moment. The chef frowned. Charlotte gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not now." The chef sighed and returned to his work. Across the dining room, Nathan raised his glass and continued entertaining his guests, completely unaware that the woman he had chosen as the target of his private joke had understood every single word. Charlotte moved through the dining room with the same quiet rhythm she had learned years ago. A tray balanced on one hand, a notepad tucked against her apron. The appearance of an ordinary waitress. That was what most people saw. It was what she allowed them to see. The dining room glowed beneath warm chandeliers. Glasses clinked softly. A jazz piano drifted through hidden speakers. On the surface, Bennett's Steakhouse looked like every other upscale restaurant in Manhattan. Beneath the surface, it carried a history that most customers never noticed. Charlotte knew every inch of the place. She knew which booth her grandfather had designed himself. She knew which framed photographs had survived a kitchen fire 20 years earlier. She knew which corner table her father always reserved for couples celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. She also knew that none of those things mattered while she wore a server's uniform. Customers saw uniforms before they saw people. It was a lesson she had learned long ago. As she entered an order into the system, another waitress approached. "Table 12 seems demanding," the woman whispered. Charlotte glanced toward Nathan's table. Laughter rolled across the group again. "Nothing I cannot handle," she replied. The waitress smiled. "You always say that." Charlotte returned the smile. She had heard worse than a few careless remarks in French. Years earlier, while studying in Paris, she had listened to professors dismantle arguments with surgical precision. She had debated classmates in crowded cafes that stayed open until midnight. She had learned that intelligence often arrived quietly and arrogance usually announced itself first. Back at table 12, Nathan continued leading the conversation. Every investor seemed focused on him. Every joke landed. Every story ended with admiration. He was used to being the center of attention. Yet, every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the young waitress crossing the dining room. It irritated him more than he cared to admit. She should have reacted by now. Most people did. Wealth created reactions. Fame created reactions. Power created reactions. Charlotte created none. She simply did her job. "Your server seems unusually calm," one investor remarked. Nathan followed the man's gaze. Charlotte was helping an elderly couple near the window. She knelt slightly beside their table, patiently explaining the dessert menu. The older woman laughed. Charlotte laughed with her. The moment looked genuine, unforced. Nathan shrugged. Some people are good at customer service. The Parisian investor swirled his wine. Or perhaps some people are good at reading a room. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Meaning? The investor only smiled and changed the subject. Meanwhile, Charlotte disappeared briefly into a hallway near the back offices. The noise of the restaurant softened. Framed photographs lined the walls. Decades of family memories. Grand openings. Charity dinners. Newspaper features. Near the end of the corridor hung a photograph of a much younger Charlotte standing beside her father on the day the restaurant reopened after a major renovation. She paused for only a second before continuing. There was work to do. Her father had always taught her the same principle. If you want to understand a business, learn every job inside it. So Charlotte had spent years doing exactly that. Dishwasher, hostess, server, event coordinator, accountant. She knew the restaurant from the floor up. Few people outside the family knew it. Fewer still would believe it. When she returned to the dining room, Nathan was watching her again. This time he noticed something different. Every employee who passed Charlotte seemed to acknowledge her. Not with the polite respect given to a coworker. Something deeper. A familiarity he could not quite explain. One busboy nodded. A bartender smiled. Even the executive chef emerged from the kitchen and briefly asked her opinion about a wine pairing before returning inside. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Curious now. The waitress he had dismissed as background scenery was beginning to look less ordinary with every passing minute. And for the first time that evening, he found himself wondering what story existed behind those calm blue eyes. The evening moved forward, but Nathan Reynolds found it increasingly difficult to focus on the conversation around him. Numbers were discussed. Projections were reviewed. Market opportunities crossed the table alongside expensive appetizers. Yet his attention kept drifting elsewhere. Charlotte moved through the dining room with effortless precision, never rushing, never appearing overwhelmed despite the growing crowd. Every table seemed to trust her. Every guest seemed comfortable around her. It was a skill Nathan recognized immediately. Trust was valuable. In business, it often took years to earn. Charlotte seemed to create it in minutes. "You are distracted tonight," one investor observed with a faint smile. Nathan returned to the conversation. "I am listening." "Perhaps," the investor replied. "But not only to us." A few people laughed quietly. Nathan ignored the comment and reached for his glass. Across the room, Charlotte was speaking with a family celebrating a birthday. She listened carefully to an elderly grandfather tell a story. She smiled at the right moments. She treated him as though he were the most important person in the restaurant. The old man left the conversation visibly happier than before. Nathan noticed. He also noticed something else. Charlotte never seemed to perform for attention. She did not seek compliments. She did not linger where powerful people sat. She simply focused on whoever needed her at that moment. It was unusual. Most people adjusted their behavior around wealth. Charlotte did not. A few minutes later, she returned to table 12 carrying their entrees. The timing was perfect. Every plate arrived exactly as ordered. The steaks were cooked precisely. The wine pairings matched each guest's preference. Even the presentation looked flawless. "Enjoy," she said warmly. Nathan studied her for a moment. "You seem very confident." Charlotte looked at him calmly. "I know my job well. That is rare these days." "So I have heard." Her answer carried no arrogance, only quiet certainty. Nathan expected her to leave. Instead, one of the French investors asked a question about a wine listed on the menu. Charlotte answered immediately. Not only did she explain the vineyard, but she described the region where the grapes were grown and the unusual weather conditions that had influenced that particular vintage. The investor blinked. "You know French wine?" Charlotte smiled politely. A little, the man repeated. Most sommeliers could not have explained it better. Nathan looked up from his plate. Charlotte simply thanked the investor and stepped away. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Yet it left an impression on everyone at the table, especially Nathan. He watched her disappear into the crowd again. Something was not adding up. Earlier, she had pronounced every French menu item flawlessly. Now she displayed knowledge that exceeded normal restaurant training. Then there was the way employees interacted with her. The chef sought her opinion. The staff respected her. Even the manager seemed unusually careful when speaking to her. Nathan had spent his career identifying hidden patterns. He trusted instincts that had earned billions of dollars. And his instincts were telling him that Charlotte Bennett was hiding something. Not out of deception, out of choice. The Parisian investor set down his fork and glanced toward the dining room. "You know," he said casually, "there is an old saying in France. The people who speak the least often know the most." Nathan followed the man's gaze. Charlotte was helping a young couple choose a dessert. Calm, patient, completely unaware she was being discussed. Or perhaps completely aware and simply unconcerned. "Maybe," Nathan replied. "Or maybe some people are very good at pretending." The investor smiled. "Perhaps, but I do not think she is pretending." Nathan looked back toward Charlotte one more time. For the first time that evening, the billionaire who usually understood everyone in the room realized he understood almost nothing about the quiet waitress serving dinner. By 8:30, the restaurant was completely full. Every table glowed beneath soft amber light. The scent of grilled steak and fresh herbs drifted through the air. Outside, rain tapped gently against the tall front windows. Inside, business deals, anniversaries, and family celebrations blended into a steady hum of conversation. Nathan Reynolds usually thrived in environments like this. He understood negotiations. He understood leverage. He understood people. Yet the quiet waitress continued to occupy a corner of his attention. It made no sense. Charlotte was returning from another table when she noticed one of the investors struggling with a menu note written in French. Before he could ask for help, Nathan leaned back in his chair. A mischievous smile appeared on his face. The same smile that had preceded many of his famous business challenges. "Actually," Nathan said, switching into fluent French, "perhaps we should test something." Several investors exchanged curious glances. Charlotte stopped beside the table with professional patience. "Can I help with anything?" Nathan ignored the question. Instead, he picked up a pen and wrote several words on the corner of a napkin. French phrases. Some correct, some intentionally wrong. Then he slid the napkin toward the center of the table. "A small exercise," he said in French, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If our waitress understands any of this, perhaps she can explain why one of these phrases makes no sense." A few investors chuckled. One looked uncomfortable again. Charlotte glanced briefly at the napkin. Only briefly. Then she looked back at Nathan. "Would anyone like more coffee?" she asked calmly. The table fell silent for a second. Nathan almost laughed. "Interesting," he replied in English. "Very professional." Charlotte offered the same polite smile. "Thank you, sir." She turned and walked away. Nathan watched her go. The reaction was not what he expected. Most people would have become flustered, embarrassed, defensive. Charlotte behaved as though the challenge had never happened. 5 minutes later, the appetizers were cleared. The main discussion returned to business. Yet something strange happened. Every document the investors requested appeared before they asked. Every wine refill arrived at the perfect moment. Every special request was handled before it became a problem. Charlotte seemed to anticipate needs before they were spoken aloud. Nathan noticed. So did everyone else. Then the first crack appeared. One investor unfolded the napkin Nathan had written on earlier. He frowned. "This phrase," he said, pointing to a line. Somebody corrected it. Nathan looked down. The grammatical error he had intentionally inserted was gone. In its place sat a perfectly written correction. Elegant handwriting. Precise. Neat. The entire table stared at the napkin. Nathan blinked. Who touched that? No one answered. The investors looked around. One smiled into his wine glass. Another hid a grin. Nathan picked up the napkin and studied the correction. Not only was it accurate, it was sophisticated. The wording was better than his original version. Across the dining room, Charlotte was helping a young boy celebrate his birthday with a slice of chocolate cake and a candle. She never once looked toward table 12. Nathan stared at the corrected phrase again, then toward Charlotte, then back to the napkin. The Parisian investor finally spoke. "Perhaps someone understands more than you think." Nathan leaned back slowly. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crept into his expression. Not because of the corrected sentence, because of the person who had corrected it. Whoever had written those words possessed near-native fluency. Whoever had written them had also chosen not to take credit. And deep down, Nathan already knew exactly who it was. Nathan turned the napkin over several times, as if a different answer might appear on the other side. The correction was undeniable. Elegant. Precise. Native-level French. Yet the person responsible continued carrying plates and refilling glasses as though nothing unusual had happened. Around the table, the investors exchanged subtle glances. Some looked amused. Others looked impressed. Nathan felt neither. He felt challenged. That was a rare feeling. He had spent most of his adult life being the person with answers. The person who entered a room already 3 steps ahead. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, he felt 1 step behind. Charlotte returned with a fresh pot of coffee. Her movements remained calm, unhurried. She poured coffee into several cups before reaching Nathan. "Would you like a refill?" she asked. Nathan looked directly at her. "Did you correct the napkin?" The question hung in the air. Nearby conversations seemed to fade. Even a few investors stopped moving. Charlotte glanced at the napkin in his hand, then back at him. "Your coffee, sir?" Nathan repeated the question. "Did you correct it?" A faint smile touched the corner of her lips. Not arrogant, not defensive, just patient. "I noticed a mistake." One investor nearly choked on his coffee. Another lowered his head to hide a grin. Nathan stared at her. "You noticed a mistake?" "Yes." "In French?" "Yes." "And you corrected it." It seemed helpful. The simplicity of her answer made the table fall silent. Nathan expected pride. He expected explanation. Instead, she spoke as though correcting advanced French grammar was no more remarkable than adjusting a misplaced fork. "Where did you learn?" he asked. Charlotte straightened slightly. "Various places." "That is not an answer. It is the answer I am giving." The Parisian investor laughed openly this time. Nathan shot him a look. The man only raised his glass. Charlotte finished pouring coffee and prepared to leave. Then Nathan switched languages again. This time his French became faster, more complex. He referenced literature, regional expressions, idioms rarely used outside native speakers. It was not a conversation anymore. It was a test. The entire table recognized it. Charlotte paused. For the first time that evening, she looked directly into Nathan's eyes. Then, in flawless French, she replied with a single sentence. Polite, precise, effortless. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Silence spread instantly across the table. One investor blinked. Another slowly lowered his wine glass. The Parisian businessman stared at Charlotte for several seconds before shaking his head in disbelief. "That accent," he finally whispered. "Paris." Charlotte gave a small nod. "A few years there." Nathan felt something shift. Earlier he had been curious. Now he was genuinely unsettled. Not because she spoke French, because she had hidden it so completely. Most people displayed their talents at the first opportunity. Charlotte seemed determined to do the opposite. "You could have answered me hours ago," Nathan said. "I could have. Why did you not?" Charlotte looked toward another table where a family was waiting for dessert menus. "Because I was working." Then she excused herself and walked away. No dramatic exit. No triumphant smile. No attempt to embarrass him. Just quiet professionalism. Nathan watched her disappear into the crowd. The investors began talking again, but he barely heard them. His attention remained fixed on the woman moving through the restaurant. The more he learned about Charlotte Bennett, the less she resembled the image he had formed when the evening began. She was not intimidated by wealth. She was not impressed by status. She did not seek recognition, and somehow those qualities made her impossible to ignore. Across the room, Charlotte stopped briefly near the service station. The older chef approached and spoke quietly. She smiled at something he said. Then both returned to work. Nathan noticed the exchange. He noticed the familiarity, the respect, the ease, and a question formed in his mind that he could no longer dismiss. Who exactly was Charlotte Bennett? The rain outside grew heavier as the evening moved toward its final hours. Water traced silver lines down the restaurant windows while inside the atmosphere remained warm and polished. Most of the guests were enjoying dessert. Some were preparing to leave. At table 12, however, the business discussion had become more serious than ever. Several folders now covered the white tablecloth. Financial projections, partnership agreements, international licensing documents. Nathan finally forced himself to focus on the reason he had come. Millions of dollars depended on the details sitting in front of him. One of the investors slid a document across the table. "This is the final translation from our legal team in Paris," he explained. "Once everyone agrees, we can move forward." Nathan nodded and began reading. At first, everything appeared normal. Then a disagreement emerged. One paragraph seemed inconsistent with the version his attorneys had reviewed earlier. Two investors interpreted the clause one way. Another interpreted it differently. The discussion became increasingly complicated. French legal language could be precise, but it could also be dangerous when translated incorrectly. "The wording suggests exclusive distribution rights," one investor argued. "No," another replied. "It only applies to regional territories." Nathan frowned. The distinction represented tens of millions of dollars. Perhaps more. He reread the paragraph twice. Then a third time. Something felt wrong. Nearby, Charlotte was clearing empty dessert plates from another table. As she passed, a few words from the discussion reached her ears. She kept walking, yet her expression changed slightly. Not concern, recognition. Several minutes later, the debate continued. Voices remained professional, but frustration was beginning to show. No one seemed completely certain of the clause's meaning. Finally, the Parisian investor sighed. "We may need another legal review." Nathan glanced at his watch. That delay could cost weeks. Across the room, Charlotte paused beside the service station. The document language echoed in her mind. She had seen similar wording before. During graduate studies. During international business seminars. During long nights translating academic case studies in Paris. She hesitated, then continued working. It was not her conversation. It was not her place. Yet a few moments later, the disagreement grew louder. One investor insisted the translation was accurate. Another insisted it contained a subtle but critical error. Nathan rubbed his temples. "Enough," he said. "Someone has to know which interpretation is correct." Silence settled over the table. Then a familiar voice spoke from nearby. "The translation is technically correct," Charlotte said gently. Every head turned toward her. She immediately looked apologetic. "I am sorry. I did not mean to interrupt." Nathan stared at her. "You were listening?" "Only accidentally." The Parisian investor leaned forward with interest. "And?" Charlotte glanced toward the document. "The problem is not the translation. It is the wording chosen in the original French." The table became completely silent. She pointed carefully to a specific sentence. "This phrase can imply exclusivity in ordinary business communication. But under French commercial law, the context changes because of the following paragraph." One investor blinked. Another immediately reached for the document. Charlotte continued. "Calm. Precise. The second paragraph limits the scope, which means regional rights remain protected. The contract does not grant full exclusivity." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the Parisian investor slowly smiled. "She is right." Another investor reread the document. His eyes widened. "She is absolutely right." Nathan looked from the contract to Charlotte, then back again. The tension that had stalled negotiations for nearly half an hour disappeared in less than 60 seconds. Charlotte had not guessed. She had not speculated. She had understood. Completely. The investors began discussing the clause again, but this time with confidence. The issue was resolved. The deal could continue. Charlotte quietly stepped back. "I apologize for interrupting," she said. "I should return to work." No one stopped her. Mostly because nobody seemed capable of speaking. Nathan watched her walk away through the dining room. The soft glow of the restaurant lights reflected against the windows behind her. And for the second time that evening, the billionaire found himself staring at the same question. Not who she pretended to be, but who she truly was. For several minutes after Charlotte walked away, nobody at table 12 seemed interested in discussing the contract anymore. The legal issue had been resolved. The partnership was back on track. Yet the conversation kept drifting toward the same subject. The quiet waitress. Nathan rarely found himself unable to explain someone. Every successful negotiation depended on understanding motives. Ambition, fear, pride, incentives. People followed patterns. Charlotte did not. One investor finally broke the silence. "You know," he said, folding the contract neatly, "most consultants charge thousands of dollars to provide the clarification she just gave us." Another nodded. "And most attorneys would have needed far longer." Nathan glanced toward the dining room. Charlotte was helping a young couple settle their bill. Nothing about her behavior suggested she had just rescued a multi-million-dollar agreement. She looked exactly the same as before. Calm, focused, unconcerned. "Perhaps she enjoys surprising people," Nathan said. The Parisian investor smiled. "No, I think she enjoys avoiding attention." The distinction lingered in Nathan's mind. Before he could respond, movement near the entrance caught everyone's attention. The restaurant manager suddenly straightened. Several employees exchanged quick glances. Even the executive chef emerged from the kitchen. Nathan noticed immediately. Something had changed. A distinguished man in his 60s had entered through a private hallway near the back offices. Silver hair, navy blazer, confident posture. He did not move like a customer. He moved like someone who belonged. Conversations among the staff softened as he passed. Several employees greeted him warmly. Others smiled with genuine affection. Nathan watched with curiosity. "Who is that?" he asked. One of the investors recognized him immediately. "That is William Bennett." Nathan frowned. The name sounded familiar. Then he remembered. Bennett Steakhouse. Bennett Hospitality Group. A respected family business that had spent decades building a reputation for excellence throughout the Northeast. William Bennett was not merely the owner of the restaurant. He was the owner of the entire company. Nathan's attention sharpened instantly. William exchanged greetings with employees before stopping near the service station. At that exact moment, Charlotte emerged carrying a tray of empty glasses. She nearly walked past him. Then William smiled. A real smile. The kind reserved for people who matter most. "Charlotte, sweetheart." The words were simple, soft, natural, yet they landed with the force of a revelation. Charlotte's face brightened immediately. "Dad." Nathan froze. Around the table, several investors stared openly. Charlotte set down the tray and embraced the older man briefly. Nothing dramatic, just the familiar affection of family. William asked her something quietly. She laughed. He laughed with her. The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet it changed everything. Nathan felt the pieces fall into place all at once. The staff respect, the confidence, the knowledge, the familiarity with every corner of the restaurant, the hidden education, the complete lack of interest in impressing wealthy guests. Charlotte Bennett was not simply working at the restaurant. She belonged to it. The realization sent an unexpected wave of embarrassment through him. Earlier that evening, he had assumed she was someone with little understanding of his world. He had joked at her expense, tested her intelligence, spoken about her in a language he believed she could not understand, all while sitting inside her family's business. As though sensing the attention, Charlotte glanced toward table 12. For a brief moment, her eyes met Nathan's. She knew, not just about the French, not just about the napkin. She knew he had finally understood who she was. Yet there was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, no revenge, only the same calm composure she had carried all evening. Then she returned to work, leaving Nathan Reynolds staring after her in silence while the rain continued to fall against the windows and the truth settled heavily across the table. The discovery changed the atmosphere of the evening, though nobody spoke about it directly. Conversations resumed. Contracts were reviewed. Dessert plates disappeared. Yet Nathan Reynolds found himself replaying every moment from the past 3 hours. Every assumption, every careless remark, every judgment he had made within seconds of meeting Charlotte Bennett. The irony was difficult to ignore. He had built a career on identifying hidden value. He invested in companies others overlooked. He recognized potential where competitors saw risk. Yet tonight he had failed to recognize the most obvious lesson sitting directly in front of him. Charlotte had never pretended to be anything. He had simply decided who she was before learning the truth. Across the dining room, William Bennett sat briefly at a corner table with several longtime customers. Employees greeted him as they passed. He knew their names, their families, their stories. Nathan watched the interactions carefully. The older man carried authority without demanding attention. Respect seemed to follow him naturally. Then Nathan noticed something else. Charlotte had inherited the same quality. Not the confidence of wealth. Something rarer. The confidence of belonging. A few minutes later, one of the investors excused himself to make a phone call. Another stepped outside beneath the covered entrance. The remaining guests drifted into smaller conversations. Nathan found himself standing near the service station where the executive chef was reviewing orders. "How long has Charlotte worked here?" he asked casually. The chef looked up. A smile appeared immediately. "Longer than most of us." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Even though her family owns the place?" The chef laughed softly. "Especially because her family owns the place." He wiped his hands on a towel before continuing. "William always believed nobody should lead a business they do not understand. Charlotte started here when she was 16. Host stand, dish room, prep kitchen, server assistant, then waitress." Nathan listened carefully. "She chose that. Every step." The chef nodded toward the dining room. "She could have taken a comfortable office years ago. Never wanted one." The answer surprised Nathan more than he expected. "What about Paris?" The chef smiled again. "You figured that part out." "Only pieces. She earned a scholarship, studied international business and languages, graduated with honors." Nathan stared across the room. Charlotte was helping an elderly woman into a coat near the front entrance. The older guest squeezed her hand affectionately before leaving. "Then why come back?" Nathan asked quietly. For the first time, the chef's smile softened. "William got sick several years ago. Nothing life-threatening now, thankfully. But during recovery, Charlotte came home." Nathan remained silent. "She postponed opportunities most people would never walk away from," the chef continued. "Consulting firms, international companies, a position in Europe. She turned them all down. To help here, to help family." The words settled heavily. Nathan looked toward William Bennett, then toward Charlotte. Suddenly, the missing pieces aligned. The knowledge, the discipline, the languages, the humility. None of it was accidental. Charlotte had not hidden success because she lacked ambition. She had chosen service over recognition, responsibility over prestige. The realization made Nathan uncomfortable, not because of who Charlotte was, because of what it revealed about himself. Earlier that evening, he had spoken French, believing it created distance, believing it placed him above the person serving his table. Yet Charlotte had understood every word and responded with restraint he was not sure he would have shown in her position. She could have embarrassed him, corrected him publicly, exposed his arrogance the moment it appeared. Instead, she had remained professional, patient, gracious. The rain outside finally began to slow. Water droplets clung to the windows like scattered diamonds reflecting city lights. Inside the restaurant, the evening neared its end. Guests prepared to leave. Chairs shifted. Receipts were signed. And for perhaps the first time in years, Nathan Reynolds found himself less impressed by power and far more impressed by character. Across the room, Charlotte glanced up briefly and noticed him watching. Their eyes met for a second. She offered a polite smile before returning to her work. Nothing more. Yet somehow that simple smile carried more dignity than all the titles and accomplishments Nathan had spent years collecting. The last guests began drifting toward the exit as the evening settled into that quiet hour between dinner service and closing time. The rain had nearly stopped. Outside, Manhattan reflected across wet sidewalks and glowing streetlights. Inside Bennett's Steakhouse, employees moved through familiar routines. Tables were cleared. Glasses were polished. Receipts were filed away. Yet one conversation remained unfinished. Nathan Reynolds stood near the front of the dining room, holding his jacket over one arm. The investors had already left. The contracts were complete. The partnership was secure. By every business measure, the evening had been a success. Still, he had not walked out the door. Across the room, Charlotte was reviewing the final checks of the night. Calm as always. Focused as always. Nathan watched her for a moment before finally crossing the room. Charlotte looked up as he approached. "Everything all right?" she asked politely. Nathan smiled faintly. "Actually, no." The answer surprised her. He glanced around the nearly empty restaurant before continuing. "I owe you an apology." For the first time all evening, Charlotte seemed unsure what to say. Nathan looked down briefly, gathering his thoughts. "When I arrived tonight, I made assumptions." He laughed softly at himself. "More than assumptions, honestly." Charlotte remained quiet. "I thought I understood exactly who you were within 30 seconds of meeting you." He shook his head. "That turned out to be one of the worst assessments I have made in years." A small smile touched Charlotte's face. "You seem to be doing fine despite that." Nathan laughed. A genuine laugh this time. Fair point. The silence that followed felt comfortable rather than awkward. Nearby, William Bennett stepped out of his office carrying a folder. He noticed the conversation but did not interrupt. Instead, he paused at a distance, watching quietly. Nathan looked back toward Charlotte. "You could have embarrassed me several times tonight. That was never my goal." "I know." He nodded slowly. "That is part of what bothers me." Charlotte tilted her head slightly. Nathan continued. "You understood every word. You corrected my mistakes. You helped save a contract. And through all of it, you treated me with more respect than I earned." Charlotte considered the statement for a moment. "People usually reveal who they are eventually," she said. "There is no reason to help them do it faster." Nathan absorbed the words. Simple, quiet, yet impossible to ignore. William finally approached and joined them. "Everything finished for the evening?" he asked Charlotte. "Almost," she replied. William smiled and looked toward Nathan. "I hope we took good care of your group." Nathan immediately extended his hand. "More than good care." William shook it warmly. "Glad to hear it." Nathan glanced at Charlotte one last time. "Your daughter saved us from a very expensive misunderstanding." William chuckled. "That sounds like Charlotte." There was pride in his voice, but no surprise. As though helping people was simply what she did. Nathan looked between father and daughter and suddenly understood something he had missed all night. The restaurant was successful because it reflected the people behind it. Respect, patience, excellence, not as marketing slogans, as habits, as values. The kind practiced when nobody was watching. He reached into his pocket and removed a business card. Then he paused. For a moment it seemed he might offer it. Instead, he slipped it back into his jacket. Charlotte noticed and smiled. Nathan smiled back. "You already have enough opportunities, do not you?" "More than enough," she replied. "Good." He nodded. "Then I will simply say thank you." Charlotte extended her hand. "You are welcome, Mr. Reynolds." He shook it. Firm, respectful, equal. Then he turned toward the door. Before stepping outside, Nathan looked back one final time. Charlotte had already returned to helping the staff close the restaurant. No spotlight, no celebration, no desire for recognition, just quiet work done well. Nathan stood there for a second longer before walking into the cool night air. And as the door closed behind him, he carried away a lesson worth far more than the deal he had signed that evening. Some people speak many languages. The rare ones speak dignity. And those are the voices nobody ever forgets.